Cinderella. Once upon a time there was a man, a widower, who took for his second wife a very proud woman. This wife, who was a widow, had 2 daughters as proud as herself. Her husband had 1 daughter, who was gentle and good as her own mother had been. The new wife hated her young stepdaughter, because her gentle ways and the sweetness of her temper, which was shown in her beautiful face, made the ill manners and frowning faces of her own daughters appear as disagreeable and ugly as they really were. So she set her to do all the meanest work of the house. The young girl swept, baked, and washed for the whole household. She wore only shabby clothes, and slept in the cold basement. Now it happened that the king's son made up his mind to give a ball, and to invite to it all the people of fashion in the countryside. There was to be dancing for 2 evenings, and the supper and entertainment were to be of a very splendid kind. Cinderella's stepsisters were invited, and very proud and happy they were, as they talked of the smart dresses they would wear, and the grand folk they would meet at the palace. When the great day came, Cinderella was busy from morning till evening, helping her stepsisters to get ready for the ball. She laced their gowns, dressed their hair, arranged their feathers and jewels, and even put on their slippers. As she did so, they teased her to amuse themselves. At last the sisters were ready, and with their mother they drove away to the palace. When they were gone, Cinderella, left alone, sat down among the cinders and began to cry. Cinderella was so startled that she stopped crying as she looked up and saw, standing before her, an old lady in a red cloak and pointed hat, leaning on a stick. This was Cinderella's fairy godmother. "I can guess what you wish," said the fairy godmother. "You wish to go to the ball at the palace." "Yes, indeed I do, dear godmother," cried Cinderella. "Run into the garden," said the fairy godmother, "and fetch me the largest pumpkin you can find." Away went Cinderella, and very soon she came back again, hugging a big yellow pumpkin. The fairy godmother scooped out the inside of the pumpkin, leaving nothing but the rind. Then she touched it with her stick, which was really a wand. And at once the pumpkin became a fine coach, shining all over with gold and lined with green. "Now fetch the mouse-trap," said she. Cinderella obeyed quickly. In the mouse-trap were 6 mice. The fairy godmother opened the trap, and as each mouse ran out she touched it with her wand, and it became a sleek and prancing horse. "There are your coach and horses," said she. "Now for the coachman. Bring me the rat-trap." Cinderella brought the rat-trap. There were 3 rats in it. The fairy godmother chose the finest of the 3, and touched it with her wand. At once the rat became a tall and handsomely dressed coachman. "Behind the watering pot are 6 green lizards," said the fairy godmother. "Bring them here." Cinderella brought the 6 lizards, and at the touch of the wand, each one was turned into a smart footman in a green uniform. The coachman mounted the box, and the footman climbed to the back of the coach. "Now your carriage is ready," said the fairy godmother. "But how can I go to the ball like this?" said Cinderella, looking down at her shabby dress. "You shall soon be more beautiful than your coach," replied her godmother, tapping her lightly with her wand. Then Cinderella's old clothes were turned into robes of silk and velvet, glittering with jewels, and the fairy godmother gave her a little pair of shining glass slippers, the prettiest that ever were seen. "Remember said her godmother,
"you must leave the ball before the clock strikes 12. If you do not, your coach will again become a pumpkin, your horses will become mice, your coachman will turn into a rat, and your footmen into lizards, while you will find yourself once more in shabby clothes."
As she entered the palace, the musicians stopped playing and the dancers stopped dancing, while all gazed in surprise at this lovely unknown princess. All the evening the prince kept right at Cinderella's side, dancing with her, and serving her with dishes at supper-time. Indeed, his mind was so taken up with her that he forgot to eat a morsel himself. While Cinderella was talking to her stepsisters, who did not know it was Cinderella, the clock chimed 12:15. Cinderella rose, and after curtsying to the company, left the palace and drove home in her coach. Then she thanked her godmother for the kindness which had given her so much happiness, and she asked if she could go to the ball again on the next evening, when the prince had specially begged her to come. At this moment there was a knock at the door. The fairy godmother and the beautiful clothes vanished as suddenly as they had come, and Cinderella drew back the bolt and let her stepmother and stepsisters in. Cinderella's stepsisters told her of the beautiful princess who had been at the ball. The next evening the stepsisters again went to the palace, and Cinderella went in her coach, even more beautifully dressed than before. The prince again kept close beside her and said so many kind things to her that Cinderella, in her happiness, forgot how quickly the hours flew past. She thought it was not yet 11 when the clock struck 12. Then she jumped up and fled from the ballroom as swiftly as a deer. The prince ran after her, but he did not catch her. All he could find of her was a little glass slipper lying on the staircase. The next morning people were roused by the sound of trumpets, and through the streets of the town came the royal chamberlain, with guards, and a servant carrying the little glass slipper on a velvet cushion. Cinderella's stepsisters were in great haste to try on the slipper, but though they pinched their toes and squeezed their heels, their feet were far too large to go into it. Then the royal chamberlain inquired whether there were any other young women in the house. "Only Cinderella," said the elder sister. "Of course, the slipper would not fit her." "Let her be brought here," said the chamberlain. So Cinderella was sent for, and, sitting down in the chair, the royal chamberlain put the slipper on Cinderella's foot. Then, to the surprise of everyone, Cinderella drew the other little glass slipper from her pocket and put that on also. And at this moment the fairy godmother appeared, and with a touch of her wand changed Cinderella's poor clothes into robes more splendid than ever. And then everyone saw that she was indeed the beautiful princess whom the prince loved. The stepsisters fell at Cinderella's feet and begged her forgiveness, and Cinderella freely forgave them and asked them to try to love her. Then she was taken to the palace, where the prince met her with great joy and married her. Soon afterwards, Cinderella fetched her stepsisters to live at the palace, and they were so much ashamed of their past conduct and so grateful for her kindness that they stopped being proud and unkind, and, as their hearts became good, their faces became beautiful. Then 2 lords of the court loved and married them, and they, as well as Cinderella, lived happily ever after. Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, a very poor woodcutter lived in a tiny cottage in the forest with his 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. His second wife often ill-treated the children, and was forever nagging the woodcutter. "There's not enough food in the house for us all. There are too many mouths to feed. We must get rid of the 2 brats," she declared, and she kept on trying to persuade her husband to abandon his children in the forest. "Take them miles from home, so far that they can never find their way back. Maybe someone will find them and give them a home." The downcast woodcutter didn't know what to do. Hansel, who one evening had overheard his parents' conversation, comforted Gretel. "Don't worry. If they do leave us in the forest, we'll find the way home," he said. And slipping out of the house, he filled his pockets with little white pebbles, then went back to bed. All night long the woodcutter's wife harped on and on at her husband, till at dawn he led Hansel and Gretel away into the forest. But as they went into the depths of the trees, Hansel dropped a little white pebble here and there on the mossy green ground. At a certain point, the 2 children found they really were alone. The woodcutter had plucked up enough courage to desert them, had mumbled an excuse, and was gone. Night fell, but the woodcutter did not return. Gretel began to sob bitterly. Hansel, too, felt scared, but he tried to hide his feelings and comfort his sister. "Don't cry. Trust me. I swear I'll take you home, even if Father doesn't come back for us." Luckily, the moon was full that night, and Hansel waited till its cold light filtered through the trees. "Now give me your hand," he said. "We'll get home safely, you'll see." The tiny white pebbles gleamed in the moonlight, and the children found their way home. They crept through a half-open window, without waking their parents. Cold, tired, but thankful to be home again, they slipped into bed. The next day, when their stepmother discovered that Hansel and Gretel had returned, she went into a rage. Stifling her anger in front of the children, she locked her bedroom door, reproaching her husband for failing to carry out her orders. The weak woodcutter protested, torn as he was between shame and fear of disobeying his cruel wife. The wicked stepmother kept Hansel and Gretel under lock and key all day with nothing for supper but a sip of water and some hard bread. All night husband and wife quarreled, and when dawn came, the woodcutter led the children out into the forest. Hansel, however, had not eaten his bread, and as he walked through the trees, he left a trail of crumbs behind him to mark the way. But the little boy had forgotten about the hungry birds that lived in the forest. When they saw him, they flew along behind, and in no time at all had eaten all the crumbs. Again, with a lame excuse, the woodcutter left his 2 children by themselves. "I've left a trail like last time," Hansel whispered to Gretel, consolingly. But when night fell, they saw to their horror that all the crumbs had gone. "I'm frightened," wept Gretel bitterly. "I'm cold and hungry, and I want to go home." "Don't be afraid. I'm here to look after you," Hansel tried to encourage his sister, but he too shivered when he glimpsed frightening shadows and evil eyes around them in the darkness. All night the 2 children huddled together for warmth at the foot of a large tree. When dawn broke, they started to wander about the forest, seeking a path, but all hope soon faded. They were well and truly lost. on they walked and walked, till suddenly they came upon a strange cottage in the middle of a glade. "This is chocolate!" gasped Hansel, as he broke a lump of plaster from the wall. "And this is icing!" exclaimed Gretel, putting another piece of wall in her mouth. Starving but delighted, the children began to eat pieces of candy broken off the cottage. "Isn't this delicious?" said Gretel, with her mouth full. She had never tasted anything so nice. "We'll stay here," Hansel declared, munching a bit of nugget. They were just about to try a piece of the biscuit door when it quietly swung open. "Well, well," said an old woman, peering out with a crafty look. "And haven't you children a sweet tooth? Come in, come in. You've nothing to fear," went on the old woman. Unluckily for Hansel and Gretel, however, the sugar candy cottage belonged to an old witch, her trap for catching unwary victims. The two children had come to a really nasty place. "You're nothing but skin and bones," said the witch, locking Hansel into a cage. "I shall fatten you up and eat you. You can do housework," she told Gretel grimly. "Then I'll make a meal of you too." As luck would have it, the witch had very bad eyesight, and when Gretel smeared butter on her glasses, she could see even less. "Let me feel your finger," said the witch to Hansel every day, to check if he was getting any fatter. Now, Gretel had brought her brother a chicken bone, and when the witch went to touch his finger, Hansel held out the bone. "You're still much too thin," she complained. "When will you become plump?" One day the witch grew tired of waiting. "Light the oven," she told Gretel. "We're going to have a tasty roasted boy today." A little later, hungry and impatient, she went on. "Run and see if the oven is hot enough." Gretel returned, whimpering, "I can't tell if it is hot enough or not." Angrily, the witch screamed at the little girl. "Useless child! All right, I'll see for myself." But when the witch bent down to peer inside the oven and check the heat, Gretel gave her a tremendous push and slammed the oven door shut. The witch had come to a fit and proper end. Gretel ran to set her brother free, and they made quite sure that the oven door was tightly shut behind the witch. Indeed, just to be on the safe side, they fastened it firmly with a large padlock. Then they stayed for several days to eat some more of the house, till they discovered amongst the witch's belongings a huge chocolate egg. Inside lay a basket of gold coins. "The witch is now burnt to a cinder," said Hansel, "so we'll take this treasure with us." They filled a large basket with food and set off into the forest to search for the way home. This time luck was with them, and on the second day they saw their father come out of the house toward them, weeping. "Your stepmother is dead. Come home with me now, my dear children." The two children hugged the woodcutter. "Promise you'll never, ever desert us again," said Gretel, throwing her arms round her father's neck. Hansel opened the basket of gold. "Look, father, we're rich now. You'll never have to chop wood again." And they all lived happily together ever after. An audio production by CandlelightStories.com.
Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there lived in a pretty cottage on the borders of a great forest a woodsman and his wife who had one little daughter, a sweet child, and a favorite with everyone who knew her. She was the joy of her mother's heart, and to please her, the good woman made her a little scarlet cloak and hood, in which she looked so pretty that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, when her mother had baked a batch of cakes, she said to Little Red Riding Hood, "I hear your poor grandmother has been ailing, so please go and see if she is any better, and take her this basket of cakes." Little Red Riding Hood, who was a willing child, immediately set off for the village where her grandmother lived, which lay on the other side of a thick wood. As she reached the outskirts of the forest, she met a wolf, who would have liked very much to have devoured her at once, had there not been some woodcutters near at hand, whom he feared might kill him in turn. So he sidled up to the little girl and said in as winning a tone as he could assume, "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood." "Good morning, Master Wolf," answered she, who had no idea of being afraid of so civil a spoken wolf. "And pray, where may you be going so early?" asked the wolf. "I am going to my grandmother's because she is ill," replied Little Red Riding Hood, who thought there could be no harm in telling him. "Where does your poor grandmamma live?" inquired the wolf, in a tone of great interest. "Down beyond the mill, on the other side of the wood," she said. "Well," cried the wolf, "I don't mind if I go and see her too. So I'll take this road, and you go through the wood, and we'll see which of us shall be there first." Now the wily wolf knew well enough that he could be the winner in such a race, for he could dash through the underwood and swim across a pond that would bring him by a very short cut to the old grandmother's cottage. Once there, the wolf gave 2 little taps, as Little Red Riding Hood might have done.
"Who's there?"
cried the old woman.
"It is I,"
said the wolf, imitating Little Red Riding Hood's voice. The grandmother, as she lay in bed almost asleep, thought her grandchild must have a bad cold to speak in such a gruff way. Not suspecting for a moment anyone else was there, she said,
"Pull the latch and come in."
So the wolf pulled the latch and went in. "Good morning, madam," said the wolf, trying to be agreeable, but looking as if he meant to eat her up.
"Good morning to you, sir,"
replied the old woman with worry. "Your granddaughter told me this morning you had been unwell, so I thought I would call to see how you were." The old woman saw the wolf looking fierce and hungry, so she instantly got off the bed, away from the wolf, and moved toward the closet. "Don't mind me," said the wolf, with a horrid grin, looking savagely hungry as he jumped over the bed. But the old woman darted into the closet and bolted the door. The wolf grinned horribly with rage and disappointment, saying to himself, "Well, never mind. I'll keep her for later. Little Red Riding Hood will be here soon. I'll have her for breakfast and finish the old woman for dinner." With these savage thoughts, the wolf put on the grandmother's clothes and got into bed, pulling the sheets up to hide his hairy face. Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood rambled through the wood with glee, stopping every now and then to pick strawberries, which she knew her grandmother loved to eat with cream. While she was thus occupied, a wasp came buzzing along, and delighted at finding so many flowers without the trouble of searching for them, he began to drink up their honey. Little Red Riding Hood said,
"Take as much honey as you like, poor wasp, only do not sting me."
The wasp buzzed louder, as if to thank her for her kindness, and when he had sipped his fill, flew away. Presently, a small robin who had been hopping about on a bough darted down on the basket and pecked at one of the strawberries.
"Eat as much as you like, pretty robin," said Little Red Riding Hood. "There will be plenty left for Grandma and me." The robin replied, "Twee, twee," in his own voice, and after gobbling up at least 3 strawberries, flew away and was soon out of sight.
Little Red Riding Hood now thought it was time to go on, so she tripped along till she came to a stream, where she saw an old woman bent over seeking for something along the bank.
"What are you looking for, ma'am?"
said the little girl.
"For watercresses, my pretty maid," mumbled the poor old woman, "and a sorry trait it is that does not earn me enough to eat bread." "Sit down and eat one of my cakes," said Little Red Riding Hood.
They sat upon the bank, and the old woman said,
"Thank you, my pretty Little Red Riding Hood. And now if you happen to meet the green huntsman as you go along, pray give him my respects, and tell him there is game in the wind."
Little Red Riding Hood promised to do so, and walked on. Presently she looked back to see how the old woman was doing, but she could see no trace of her. She seemed to have vanished clean out of sight. Puzzled, Little Red Riding Hood returned to her path and continued on her way. Shortly thereafter, however, she saw a huntsman clad in green from top to toe, standing on the bank.
"Good morning, Mr. Huntsman," said Little Red Riding Hood. "The old woman says there is game in the wind."
The huntsman nodded, and then drew out an arrow tipped with a green feather, and strung his bow, without taking any further notice of Little Red Riding Hood, who trudged onward, wondering what it all meant. Presently the little girl reached her grandmother's cottage, and knocked at the door.
"Who is there?"
cried the hoarse voice from inside.
"Oh, dear!"
thought Little Red Riding Hood to herself.
"What a dreadful cold poor darling Granny must have to be so hoarse."
But she called out,
"It is your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood, who has brought you some cakes."
The wolf then replied,
"Lift the latch and come in."
Little Red Riding Hood did as she was told, then entered the cottage. The wolf then hid his head under the sheets and said,
"Put the cakes on the shelf, my dear, and come sit beside me."
Little Red Riding Hood set down her basket, and then sat beside the wolf.
"Dear me, Grandmamma," said the little girl, "what long arms you have!" "The better to hug you with, my child," answered the wolf.
"But, Grandmamma, what long ears you have!" said Little Red Riding Hood.
"The better to hear you with, my child," replied the wolf.
"But, Grandmamma, what large eyes you have!" said the little girl.
"The better to see you with, my child," said the wolf.
"But, Grandmamma, what terrible large teeth you have!" said Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to eat you with!" exclaimed the wolf, who was just about to spring when a wasp flew into the cottage, stung the wolf in his nose, and made him sneeze, which gave the signal for the robin perched on the branch near the open window, who called out, "Twee! Twee!" which warned the green huntsman, who shot his arrow through the window into the cottage and right into the wolf's cold, greedy heart, killing him there on the spot. Hearing a noise from the closet, Little Red Riding Hood opened the door and found her grandmother safe and sound. After much happiness, Little Red Riding Hood headed for home. At the edge of the forest, she thought she saw the old woman by the stream, but to her surprise, the old woman was now much younger.
"Little Red Riding Hood,"
said the fairy, for that's what she was, "your goodness of heart has saved you from a great danger. Had you not helped the poor old woman, she would not have sent word to the green huntsman to save you." So saying, the fairy vanished, and Little Red Riding Hood hurried home to tell her family all that had happened, and was immediately clasped in her mother's grateful arms.
The Pied Piper. A very long time ago, the town of Hamelin was invaded by bands of rats, the like of which had never been seen before, nor ever will be again. They were great black creatures that ran boldly in broad daylight through the streets, and swarmed so all over the houses that people could not put their hand or foot down anywhere without touching one. When dressing in the morning, they found them in their breeches and petticoats, in their pockets and in their boots, and when they wanted a morsel to eat, the voracious horde had swept away everything from cellar to attic. The night was even worse. As soon as the lights were out, these untiring nibblers set to work, and everywhere, in the ceilings, in the floors, in the cupboards, at the doors, there was a chase and a rummage, and so furious a noise of teeth and claws that a deaf man could not have rested for even an hour. Neither cats, nor dogs, nor poison, nor traps, nor prayers, nor candles burnt to all the saints would do anything. The more they killed, the more they came, and the inhabitants of Hamelin began to go to the dogs. When one Friday there arrived in the town a man with a long face who played the pipe. He was a great, gawky fellow, dry and bronzed, with a crooked nose, a long rat-tail mustache, 2 great yellow piercing and mocking eyes, under a large felt hat, set off by a scarlet feather. He was dressed in a green jacket, with a leather belt and red pants, and on his feet were sandals fastened by thongs, passed round his legs in the gypsy fashion. That is how he may be seen to this day, painted on a window of the cathedral of Hamelin. He stopped in the great marketplace before the town hall, turned his back on the church, and went on with his music. The town council had just assembled to consider once more this plague of rats, from which no one could save the town. The stranger sent word to the town council that if they would make it worth his while, he would rid them of all their rats before night, down to the very last. "Then he is a sorcerer!" cried the citizens with one voice. "We must beware of him!" The mayor, who was considered clever, reassured them. He said, "Sorcerer or no, if this piper speaks the truth, it is he who has sent this horrible vermin that he wants to rid us of today for money. Well, we must learn to catch the devil in his own snares. You leave it to me." "Leave it to the mayor," said the citizens one to another. And the stranger was brought before them. "Before night," he said, "I shall have dispatched all the rats in Hamelin, if you will but pay me 1 gold coin for each head." "A coin a head?" cried the citizens. "But that will come to millions." The mayor simply shrugged his shoulders and said to the stranger, "A bargain! To work! You will be paid 1 coin a rat head as you ask." The Pied Piper announced that he would get to work that very evening when the moon rose. He added that the townspeople should at that hour leave the streets free, and content themselves with looking out their windows at what was happening, and that it would be a pleasant spectacle. When the people of Hamelin heard of the bargain, they too exclaimed, "A coin a head? But this will cost us a lot of money." "Leave it to the mayor," said the town council with a sly air. And the good people of Hamelin repeated with their counselors, "Leave it to the mayor." Toward 9 at night, the piper reappeared in the marketplace. He turned his back to the church, and the moment the moon rose on the horizon, he played his first notes on his pipe. It was first a slow, caressing sound. then more and more lively and urgent, and so sonorous and piercing that it penetrated as far as the farthest alleys and retreats of the town. Soon from the bottom of the cellars, the tops of the roofs, from under all the furniture, from all the nooks and corners of the houses, out come the rats, search for the door, fling themselves into the streets, and trip, trip, trip begin to run in file towards the front of the town hall, so squeezed together that they covered the pavement like flooding waves. When the square was quite full, the piper turned around, and, still playing briskly, turned toward the river that runs at the foot of the walls of Hamelin. When he got to the river bank, he turned round. The rats were following. "Hop, hop!" he cried, pointing with his finger to the middle of the stream, where the water whirled and was drawn down as if through a funnel. And hop, hop, without hesitating, the rats took the leap, plunged straight to the bottom, and disappeared. The plunging continued without stopping till midnight. At last, dragging himself with difficulty, came a big rat, white with age, and stopped on the bank. It was the king of the rats. "Are they all in the river, King Rat?" asked the piper. "They are all there," replied the king rat. "And how many are they?" 990,999. "Exactly that many?" "Exactly that many," said the king rat. "Then go and join them, old sire." Then the old white rat sprang into the river, swam into the whirlpool, and disappeared. When the piper had ended his business, he went to bed at the inn. And for the first time during 3 months, the people of Hamelin slept quietly through the night. The next morning at 9 o'clock, the piper went to the town hall, where the town council awaited him. "All your rats took a jump into the river yesterday," said he to the councillors, "and I guarantee that not one of them comes back. They were 990,999 at 1 gold coin a head." "Let us count the heads first," said the mayor. "Where are the heads?" The piper did not expect this sly trick. He paled with anger, and his eyes flashed fire. "The heads!" cried he. "If you care about them, go and find them in the river." "Well," replied the mayor, "we could refuse to pay you anything at all, but you have been of use to us, and we will not let you go without a little something. Here, take these 4 gold coins." "Keep your 4 pieces for yourself," replied the piper proudly. "If you do not pay me what you owe, I will be paid by your children." Then he pulled his hat down over his eyes, walked quickly out of the hall, and left the town without speaking to a soul. When the Hamelin people heard how it had all ended, they rubbed their hands and laughed at the piper, who, they said, was caught in his own trap. But what made them laugh above all was his threat of getting himself paid by their children. Ha! They knew a fool when they saw one. The next day, which was a Sunday, they all went happily to church, thinking that after Mass they would at last be able to eat some good food that the rats had not tasted before them. They never suspected the terrible surprise that awaited them on their return home. No children anywhere. They had all disappeared. "Our children! Where are our poor children?" was the cry that was soon heard in all the streets. Then through the east door of the town came 3 little boys who cried and wept, and this is what they told. While the parents were at church, a wonderful music had been heard. Soon all the little boys and all the little girls that had been left at home had gone out, attracted by the magic sounds, and had rushed to the great marketplace. There they found the piper, playing his pipe, at the same spot as the evening before. Then the stranger had begun to walk quickly, and they had followed, running, singing, and dancing to the sound of the music, all the way to the foot of the mountain outside Hamelin. At their approach, the mountain had opened a little, and the piper had gone in with them, after which it had closed again. Only the three little ones who told the adventure had remained outside, as if by a miracle. One was lame and could not run fast enough. The other, who had left the house in only one shoe, had hurt himself against a big stone and could not walk. The third had arrived in time, but in hurrying to go in with the others, had run so hard into the wall of the mountain that he fell backwards at the moment it closed upon his friends. At this story, all the parents cried out in horror. They ran with sticks and shovels to the mountain, and searched till evening to find the opening by which their children had disappeared, without being able to find it. At last, with night falling, they returned to Hamelin. But the most unhappy of all was the mayor, for he lost all his children. And to crown it all, the people of Hamelin chased him out of town, forgetting that the evening before they had all agreed with him. What had become of all those unfortunate children? The parents always hoped they were not dead, and that the piper, who certainly must have come out of the mountain, would have taken them with him to his country. That is why, for several years, they sent ships to search for them. No shore was left unvisited, no sea unsailed, and year after year the ships returned home empty, to everyone's great sorrow. And so the citizens of Hamelin, to remind themselves of how foolish they had been to misjudge the musical stranger, painted his image on the window of the cathedral, and never forgot the day their children had vanished. Rapunzel. Once upon a time there lived a husband and wife who very much longed to have children. These good people had a little window at the back of their house, which looked into the most lovely garden, full of all manner of beautiful flowers and vegetables. But the garden was surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to enter it, for it belonged to a witch of great power, who was feared by the whole world. One day the woman stood at the window overlooking the garden, and saw there the finest green leafy vegetables. These leaves looked so fresh, luscious, and green that she longed to eat them. As if cast in a spell, the desire grew day by day, and just because she knew she couldn't possibly get any, she pined away and became quite pale and sickly. Then her husband grew alarmed and said, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Oh," she answered, "if I don't get some leaves to eat from the garden, I know I shall die." The man who loved her dearly thought to himself, "Rather than let my wife die, I shall fetch her some leaves, no matter what the cost." So, at dusk, he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, and, hastily gathering a handful of leaves, he returned with them to his wife. She made them into a salad, which tasted so good that her longing for the forbidden food was greater than ever. If she were to know any peace of mind, there was nothing for her husband to do but climb over the garden wall and again fetch her this delectable food. So, at dusk, over the wall he went, but when he reached the other side, he drew back in terror, for there, standing before him, was the old witch. With a wrathful stare, she said,
"How dare you climb into my garden and steal my vegetables like a common thief? You shall suffer for your foolishness."
"Oh, pardon my stealing! Necessity alone drove me to the deed. My wife saw your green, leafy vegetables from her window and conceived such a desire for them that she would certainly have died if her wish had not been gratified." At that, the witch's anger was a little lessened, and she said,
"If it's as you say, you may take as many leaves away with you as you like, but on one condition only: that you give me the child your wife will shortly bring into the world. All shall go well with it, and I will look after it like a mother."
The man, in his terror, agreed to everything she asked, and as soon as the child was born, the witch appeared, and having given it the name of Rapunzel, she carried it off with her, leaving the parents devastated and forlorn. As she grew, Rapunzel became the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the witch, fearing Rapunzel would run away, shut her up in a tower in the middle of a great forest. The tower had neither stairs nor doors, only high up at the very top a small window. When the old witch wanted to get in, she stood underneath and called out,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair."
For Rapunzel had wonderful long hair, and it was as fine as spun gold. Whenever she heard the witch's voice, she unloosed her braids of hair and let it fall down out of the window about 20 yards below, and the old witch climbed up by it. After they had lived like this for a few years, it happened one day that a prince was riding through the forest and passed by the tower. As he drew near it, he heard someone singing so sweetly that he stood spellbound and listened. It was Rapunzel, in her loneliness, trying to while away the time by letting her sweet voice ring out into the forest. The prince longed to see the owner of the voice, but he sought in vain for a door in the tower. He rode home, but he was so haunted by the song he had heard that he returned every day to the forest and listened. One day, when he was standing behind a tree, he saw the old witch approach and heard her call out,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair."
Then Rapunzel let down her braids, and the witch climbed up by them. "So that's the staircase, is it?" said the Prince. "Then I too will climb it and try my luck." So, on the following day, at dusk, he went to the foot of the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair." And as soon as she had let it down, the Prince climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man came in, for she had never seen one before. But the Prince spoke to her so kindly, and told her at once that his heart had been so touched by her singing that he felt he should know no peace of mind till he had seen her. Very soon Rapunzel forgot her fear, and when he asked her to marry him, she consented at once. "For he is young and handsome, and I'll certainly be happier with him than with the old witch." So she put her hand in his and said, "Yes, I will gladly go with you. Only how am I to get down out of the tower? Every time you come to see me, you must bring a reel of silk with you, and I will make a ladder of them, and when it is finished, I will climb down by it, and you will take me away on your horse." They arranged that till the ladder was ready, he was to come to her every evening, because the old woman was with her during the day. The old witch, of course, knew nothing of what was going on, till one day Rapunzel, momentarily forgetting her situation, turned to the witch and said, "How is it, good mother, that you are so much harder to pull up than the young prince? He is always with me in a moment."
"Oh, you wicked child!" cried the witch. "What is this I hear? I thought I had hidden you safely from the whole world, and in spite of it you have managed to deceive me."
In her wrath she seized Rapunzel's beautiful hair, and then, grasping a pair of scissors, snipped it off. Rapunzel tearfully looked down at the beautiful braids that lay on the ground. The witch ignored the tears, and worse than that, was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel to a lonely desert place and left her there to live in loneliness and misery. Then, on the evening of the day in which she had driven poor Rapunzel away, the witch fastened the braids of hair onto a hook in the window, and when the prince came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair," the witch let them down. The prince climbed up as usual, but instead of his beloved Rapunzel, he found the old witch, who fixed her evil, glittering eyes on him and cried mockingly,
"You thought to find your lady love, but the pretty bird has flown and its song is silent. The cat caught it and will scratch out your eyes too. Rapunzel is lost to you forever, and you will see her never more."
The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he jumped right down from the tower, and though he escaped with his life, the thorns among which he fell pierced his eyes and blinded him, just as the witch had predicted. He rose unsteadily to his feet and began to wander blind and miserable through the forest, eating nothing but roots and berries, while he wept and lamented the loss of his lovely bride. And so it was he wandered about for some years, as wretched and unhappy as he could be, all the while listening, hoping to hear the beautiful voice of his lovely Rapunzel. And Rapunzel, lonely and isolated, continued to sing, hoping it would somehow bring the prince to her side as it had done once before. His wandering continued until at last he came to the desert place to which Rapunzel had been banished. All of a sudden he heard a voice which was wonderfully familiar to him. He walked eagerly in the direction of the sound, and when he was quite close, Rapunzel recognized him, and they fell into each other's arms and wept. It was at that moment that 2 of her tears touched his eyes, making them clear, and in a miracle the prince could see again as well as he ever had. After much rejoicing and affection, he lovingly led her to his kingdom, where they lived happily ever after.
Rumpelstiltskin. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter who had a beautiful daughter. The woodcutter was very proud of her. One day he boasted to the king, "My daughter can spin straw into gold." "If your daughter can do this," said the king, "bring her to me, and I shall see." So the woodcutter went home and told his daughter to wear her most lovely dress and come before the king. The king took the girl to a room in his castle that was filled with straw. As he showed her the spinning wheel in the corner, he said, "Spin this straw into gold by sunrise, or you shall die." The woodcutter's daughter sat on the stool and began to cry. Suddenly the door creaked open, and a strange little man appeared. "What will you give me to spin this straw into gold?" asked the little man. "I'll gladly give you my necklace." "Good," he said, taking the necklace. The little man set to work, and by sunrise the room was filled with gold. When the king saw the gold, he became greedy. He got more straw. "By sunrise all this shall be gold." Once more the woodcutter's daughter began to cry. In a moment the door opened, and in came the strange little fellow. "What will you give me this time?" he asked. "I'll gladly give you my ring," said the girl. "Good," said the little man, as he sat down to spin the straw. By sunrise all the straw was gold. Once more the king was pleased. He got even more straw. "Spin this straw into gold, and in the morning I shall marry you and make you my queen." When the king went away, the little fellow returned. "What will you give me this time?" he asked. "I've nothing left to give," replied the woodcutter's daughter. "Then you shall give me your first child when you are queen." She promised the little man her first child. By sunrise, the straw was gold, and the king married the woodcutter's daughter. The happy queen had a baby boy and forgot all about her promise. One day, the little man came to take the queen's baby boy. The queen begged to keep her child. The little man said, "You have 3 days to guess my name. If you can't, I shall take your baby boy." All night the queen thought of every name. In the morning, when the little man came, she tried all of them. At each one, the little man said, "No, it is not I." On the second day, she tried even more names. "No, it is not I," said the little man. That night, one of the queen's messengers came to her to tell of a strange sight indeed. While riding through the forest, he had seen a fire. Around the fire danced an odd fellow who sang a song. This was what he sang. "Today I bake, tomorrow I brew, then, dear prince, I come for you. None can guess, none can claim, that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." That night the little man came calling. "What is my name?" he asked, jumping up and down. "It's Robin," answered the queen. "It is not." "It's Jack," said the queen. "It is not." "Then Rumpelstiltskin is your name." At this the little fellow flew into a rage. "Curses!" he shrieked, and stamped his feet so hard that he fell through the floor and disappeared forever. Sally on the Island. Sally was in no mood for distractions, and so her school bus roared right on by her. She was wondering why the moon was out in the daytime. As she wondered, a moonbeam came right down to the sidewalk and lifted Sally up. She rose high above the city. Her sparrow friend, Ato, flew after her as fast as his little wings could carry him. The moonbeam carried them all the way up to the moon. Sally and Ato came floating down to the door of a moon castle. The door opened with a bang, and there stood the Moon Queen. Inside the moon castle, the Moon Queen fumed. "My rocking chair throne is gone. My rocker is stolen, burgled, and robbed," she huffed. "My gosh!" Sally gasped. "Where's it gone?" "A robber got it and went on vacation." "To Florida?" "No, to a South Sea island," the Moon Queen huffed importantly. "Now what'll happen, Queen?" Sally asked with worry. "If I cannot rock that rocker, the moon won't go around," explained the Moon Queen. "And then what?" asked Sally. "Is it too terrible to tell?" "Nearly," muttered the Queen. "Now, let's see. If the moon stops going round, then—" "What will cows jump over?" asked the Moon Queen. "How will fishes see? What will sailors sing to? What will wolves howl about? How will oceans roar? Where will rockets go? Need I say more?" "Come on!" Sally called to Ato. "We're heading for the South Seas." Ado did not think that was such a fine idea. Down they went to a South Sea island called Hakakima. They made their way through thick and dangerous jungle vines. Soon they came to a beach. There in the Moon Queen's rocking chair sat the robber. He puffed a cigar and wiggled his toes. Sally and Ato fetched a crab. Then Sally, on tippy toes, snuck, and dropped the angry crab onto the robber's big toe. He flew 6 feet into the air, and Sally snatched the chair. She ran very fast and jumped on top of a truck. The robber tried, but he went splat! Hooray! Cried the Moon Queen. My rocker is back! Sally was matter of fact. The Queen sat upon her rocker and rocked. Then the moon started going round again. And now cows can jump, fishes can see, sailors can sing, wolves can howl, oceans can roar, rockets can go. Need I say more?
Sally Saves Christmas. It was a cold, snowy Christmas Eve. Sally hung her stocking from a nail by the fire and went upstairs to her room. Sally was about to close her eyes and fall asleep when she thought she would have a last look out the window. She wanted to see Santa Claus in his sleigh. She crawled out from under her blanket and went to the window. Outside, in a tree, the sparrows were bundled up for the cold night. Christmas decorations hung all around their cozy nest. As Sally watched the moon rise over the town, a magic moonbeam shone down and touched the windowsill. Sally opened the window to the cold winter night. She heard a faraway horn blow 3 notes. Ta-ta-ta! She climbed out onto the magic moonbeam. The littlest sparrow in the nest woke and saw Sally. "Where are you going?" asked the sparrow. "Up there, to the moon," Sally whispered. "On Christmas Eve?" grumped the little sparrow. "Don't you hear that horn blowing? That means we have to go," Sally said as she started up the moonbeam. The sparrow flew after her as she led the way. Higher and higher they went, through the cold night, over the clouds, and all the way to the moon. They came to a door in the wall of a moon castle. Before Sally could knock, the door swung open, and there stood the Moon Queen. She was very worried. "This way!" cried the Moon Queen, waving her arms. "We must hurry!" Sally, the sparrow, and the Moon Queen ran through the winding hallways of the castle. They climbed to the top of a tall tower. The queen went to the edge and pointed at a shorter tower with a big spring on top. "Jump-a-roo!" cried the Moon Queen. Sally held on to the sparrow as all three of them jumped onto the spring. It went sprang and sent them flying off the tower, clear to the other side of the moon. They landed with a whomp. There, stuck in the moon dust, was Santa's sleigh. His reindeer stood around cleaning their fur. Santa himself sat in his sleigh, staring at the stars. Stuck on his head was a big, shiny satellite, all broken and smashed. "What's wrong with Santa?" Sally asked. "He crashed into a satellite," said the Queen, "and he doesn't even remember who he is. It's terrible. And on Christmas Eve." Sally went to Santa and spoke. "Santa, let me take that satellite off your head," she said.
"Satellite? Oh, yes. Certainly, my child. Take it off my head,"
Santa said in a most puzzled way. Sally tossed the broken satellite onto the ground and patted Santa's aching head.
"Ouch!"
cried Santa. "It's Christmas Eve," said Sally.
"It's what? Christmas Eve? I don't know what you mean, I'm afraid,"
said Santa. "You have to take presents to all the children in the world," said Sally.
"Ho, ho, ho!"
laughed Santa.
"Surely you're cracked. Let's see. That would be 1, 2, 3.
Santa started counting on his fingers all the children in the world. Sally took the reins from Santa's hands. "I'll show you," she said. With a tremendous tug, she cried to the reindeer, "Be off!" The reindeer leaped and pulled the sleigh into the starry sky. The sparrow flew as fast as he could and sat on Santa's shoulder. The Moon Queen waved and called out, "Save Christmas, Sally! Save Christmas!" Sally tried with all her might to fly Santa's sleigh straight. They flew over a town in Kansas and landed on a roof with a thump. "Now, Santa," Sally said, "you've got to go down the chimney and put the presents under the tree."
"Chimney? And get soot on my suit? Heavens, child, have you no respect for the elderly?"
huffed Santa. Sally pulled him out of the sleigh. With all her might, she pushed him to the chimney and stuffed him in head first. Santa roared with displeasure as he slid to the bottom. He landed on his head and went, "Oof!" Then Santa sat up and gazed at the shining Christmas tree before him. He saw the 2 stockings that the children had hung. Then, in a twinkling, the knock on his head made his memory come back.
"Oh," said Santa, "Claus is my name. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm late."
He piled presents under the tree and scrambled back to the roof.
"Sally, you've saved Christmas,"
Santa said as he climbed into his sleigh.
"I would be proud if you'd fly with me tonight."
Sally smiled as Santa shouted to the reindeer,
"Be off!"
The reindeer snorted and pulled the sleigh into the air. They flew as fast as Santa's magic could carry them over oceans and countries and islands and cities. When Santa was finished, he brought Sally and the sparrow back home to their town.
"Good night, dear intrepid Sally,"
Santa said with a chuckle. As he flew back to the North Pole, Santa shouted,
"Christmas is saved! To all a good night!"
Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, there was a queen who had a beautiful baby daughter. So proud and excited was the queen at the birth of her child that she asked every fairy in the kingdom to the christening, but unfortunately forgot to invite one of them, who was a bit of a witch as well. The fairy witch came anyway, but as she passed the baby's cradle, she said,
"When you are 16, you will injure yourself with a spindle and die."
"Oh, no!" screamed the queen in horror. A good fairy standing nearby quickly chanted a magic spell to change the curse. If she did hurt herself, rather than die, the girl would now fall into a very deep sleep. The years went by. The little princess grew and became the most beautiful girl in the whole kingdom. Her mother, never forgetting the curse, was always very careful to keep her away from spindles. But on her 16th birthday, as the princess wandered through the castle, she came into a room where an old servant was spinning. "What are you doing?" she asked the servant.
"I'm spinning. Haven't you seen a spindle before?"
"No, let me see it." The servant lifted the spindle and handed it to the princess, who, as she grabbed it, pricked herself with its needle and, with a sigh, dropped to the floor. The terrified old woman hurried to tell the queen. Beside herself with anguish, the queen did her best to awaken her daughter, but in vain. The court doctors were called. The wizards were called, but there was nothing they could do. The girl could not be awakened from her deep sleep. The good fairy, who managed to avoid the worst of the curse, came too, and the queen said to her, "When will my daughter awaken?" "I don't know," the fairy admitted sadly. "In a year's time? 10 years or 20? The queen went on. "Maybe in 100 years' time. Who knows?" said the fairy. "Oh, what would make her waken?" asked the queen, weeping. "Love," replied the fairy. "If a man pure of heart were to fall in love with her, that would bring her back to life." "How can a man fall in love with a sleeping girl?" sobbed the queen, and so heartbroken was she that a few days later she died. The sleeping princess was taken to her room and laid on the bed surrounded by garlands of flowers. She was so beautiful, with a sweet face, not like those of the dead, but pink, like those who are sleeping peacefully. The good fairy said to herself, "When she wakens, who is she going to see around her? Strange faces and people she doesn't know? I can never let that happen. It would be too painful for this unfortunate girl." So the fairy cast a spell, and everyone that lived in the castle, soldiers, ministers, guards, servants, ladies, pages, cooks, maids, and knights, all fell into a deep sleep, wherever they were at that very moment. "Now," thought the fairy, "when the princess wakes up, they too will awaken, and life will go on from there." And so she left the castle, now wrapped in silence. Not a sound was to be heard. Nothing moved except for the clocks, but when they too ran down, they stopped, and time stopped with them. Not even the faintest rustle was to be heard, only the wind whistling round the turrets. Not a single voice, only the cry of birds. The years sped past. In the castle grounds, the trees grew tall. The bushes became thick and straggling. The grass invaded the courtyards, and the creepers spread up the walls. In 100 years, a dense forest grew up. Now it so happened that a prince arrived in these parts.
He was the son of a king in a country close by. Young, handsome, and melancholy, he sought in solitude everything he could not find in the company of other men: serenity, sincerity, and purity. Wandering on his trusty steed, he arrived one day at the dark forest. Being adventurous, he decided to explore it. He made his way through slowly and with a struggle, for the trees and bushes grew in a thick tangle. A few hours later, now losing heart, he was about to turn his horse and go back, when he thought he could see something through the trees. He pushed back the branches. Wonder of wonders! There in front of him stood a castle with high towers. The young man stood stock still in amazement. "I wonder who this castle belongs to," he thought. The young prince rode on towards the castle. The drawbridge was down, and, holding his horse by the reins, he crossed over it. Immediately he saw the inhabitants draped all over the steps, the halls, and courtyards, and said to himself, "Good heavens, they're dead!" But in a moment he realized that they were not dead, but sound asleep. "Wake up! Wake up!" he shouted. But nobody moved. Still thoroughly astonished, he went into the castle and again discovered more people lying fast asleep on the floor. Then, as though led by a hand in the complete silence, the prince finally reached the room where the beautiful princess lay fast asleep. For a long time he stood gazing at her face, so full of serenity, so peaceful, lovely, and pure, and he felt spring to his heart that love he had always been searching for and never found. Overcome by emotion, he went close, lifted the girl's little white hand, and gently kissed it. And at that kiss, the princess quickly opened her eyes, and awakening from her long, long sleep, seeing the prince beside her, murmured, "Oh, you have come at last. I was waiting for you in my dream. I've waited so long." Just then the spell was broken. The princess rose to her feet, held out her hand to the prince, and at that exact moment, the whole castle woke up too. Everybody rose to their feet, and they all stared round in amazement, wondering what had happened. When they finally realized, they rushed to the princess and discovered her more beautiful and happier than ever. A few days later, the castle that only a short time before had lain in silence now rang with the sound of singing, music, and happy laughter at the great party given in honor of the prince and princess who were about to be wed. They did indeed get married, and as they always do in fairy tales, lived happily ever after.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in a great castle, a prince's daughter grew up happy and contented, in spite of a jealous stepmother. She was very pretty, with blue eyes and long black hair. Her skin was delicate and fair, and so she was called Snow White. Everyone was quite sure she would become very beautiful. Though her stepmother was a wicked woman, she too was very beautiful, and the magic mirror told her this every day whenever she asked it. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the loveliest lady in the land?" The reply was always, "You are, your Majesty." Until the dreadful day when she heard it say, "Snow White is the loveliest in the land." The stepmother was furious and wild with jealousy. She began plotting to get rid of her rival. Calling one of her trusty servants, she bribed him with a rich reward to take Snow White into the forest, far away from the castle. Then, unseen, he was to put her to death. The greedy servant, attracted to the reward, agreed to do this deed, and he led the innocent girl away. However, when they came to the fatal spot, The man's courage failed him, and, leaving Snow White sitting beside a tree, he mumbled an excuse and ran off. Snow White was all alone in the forest. Night came, but the servant did not return. Snow White, alone in the dark forest, began to cry bitterly. She thought she could feel terrible eyes spying on her, and she heard strange sounds and rustlings that made her heart thump. At last, overcome by tiredness, she fell asleep curled under a tree. Snow White slept fitfully, wakening from time to time with a start, and staring into the darkness around her. Several times she thought she felt something or someone near her as she slept. At last, dawn woke the forest to the song of the birds, and Snow White too awoke. A whole world was stirring to life, and the girl was glad to see how silly her fears had been. However, the thick trees were like a wall around her, and as she tried to find out where she was, she came upon a path. She walked along it hopefully. On she walked till she came to a clearing. There stood a very strange cottage with a tiny door, tiny windows, and a tiny chimney pot. Everything about the cottage was much tinier than it ought to be. Snow White pushed the door open. "I wonder who lives here," she said to herself, peeping round the kitchen. "What tiny plates! And spoons! There must be 7 of them. The table's laid for 7 people." Upstairs was a bedroom with 7 neat little beds. Going back to the kitchen, Snow White had an idea. "I'll make them something to eat. When they come home they'll be glad to find a meal ready." Towards dusk, 7 tiny men marched homewards, singing. And when they opened the door, to their surprise, they found a bowl of hot, steaming soup on the table, and the whole house spick and span. Upstairs was Snow White, fast asleep on one of the beds. The chief dwarf prodded her gently. "Who are you?" he asked. Snow White told them her sad story, and tears sprang to the dwarf's eyes. Then one of them said, as he noisily blew his nose, "Stay here with us." "Hooray! Hooray!" they cheered, dancing joyfully round the little girl. The dwarves said to Snow White, "You can live here and tend to the house while we're down the mine. Don't worry about your stepmother leaving you in the forest. We love you and we'll take care of you." Snow White gratefully accepted their hospitality, and next morning the dwarves set off for work. But they warned Snow White not to open the door to strangers. Meanwhile, the servant had returned to the castle with the heart of a deer. He gave it to the cruel stepmother, telling her it belonged to Snow White, so that he could claim the reward. Highly pleased, the stepmother turned again to the magic mirror. But her hopes were dashed, for the mirror replied, "The loveliest in the land is still Snow White, who lives in the 7 dwarfs' cottage down in the forest." The stepmother was beside herself with rage. "She must die! She must die!" she screamed. Disguising herself as an old peasant woman, she put a poisoned apple with the others in her basket. Then, taking the quickest way into the forest, she crossed the swamp at the edge of the trees. She reached the bank unseen, just as Snow White stood waving goodbye to the 7 dwarfs on their way to the mine. Snow White was in the kitchen when she heard the sound at the door. Knock, knock. "Who's there?" she called suspiciously, remembering the dwarf's advice. "I'm an old peasant woman, selling apples," came the reply. "I don't need any apples, thank you," she replied.
But they are beautiful apples, and ever so juicy,"
said the velvety voice from outside the door. "I'm not supposed to open the door to anyone," said the girl, who was reluctant to disobey her friends.
"And quite right, too. Good girl. If you promised not to open to strangers, then of course you can't buy an apple. You are a good girl indeed."
Then the old woman went on.
"And as a reward for being good, I am going to make you a gift of one of my apples."
Without a further thought, Snow White opened the door just a tiny crack to take the apple.
"There. Now isn't that a nice apple?"
Snow White bit into the fruit, and as she did, fell to the ground in a faint. The effect of the terrible poison left her lifeless instantly. Now, chuckling evilly, the wicked stepmother hurried off, but as she ran back across the swamp, she tripped and fell into the quicksand. No one heard her cries for help, and she disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, the dwarfs came out of the mine to find the sky had grown dark and stormy. Loud thunder echoed through the valleys, and streaks of lightning ripped the sky. Worried about Snow White, they ran as quickly as they could down the mountain to the cottage. There they found Snow White, lying still and lifeless, the poisoned apple by her side. They did their best to bring her back, but it was no use. They wept and wept for a long time. Then they laid her on a bed of rose petals, carried her into the forest, and put her in a glass coffin. Each day they laid a flower there. Then one evening they discovered a strange young man admiring Snow White's lovely face through the glass. After listening to the story, the prince, for he was a prince, made a suggestion. "If you allow me to take her to the castle, I'll call in famous doctors to waken her from this peculiar sleep. She's so lovely. I'd love to kiss her." He did, and as though by magic, the prince's kiss broke the spell. To everyone's astonishment, Snow White opened her eyes. She had amazingly come back to life. Now, in love, the prince asked Snow White to marry him, and the dwarfs reluctantly had to say goodbye to Snow White. From that day on, Snow White lived happily in a great castle, but from time to time she was drawn back to visit the little cottage down in the forest. The Boy in the Paper Boat. There was once a boy named Jack who knew how to make paper boats. He could fold boats out of newspapers, note papers, wrapping papers, and even paper towels. One evening, Jack folded the most worthy boat out of a magazine page. It was shiny. It had words and pictures all over it. Its sail was truly the tallest and best Jack had ever seen on a paper boat. Jack put his new boat on the table next to his bed and went to sleep. As Jack slept, small noises began to come from the paper boat. Soon, the boat had a little paper crew that was preparing to set sail. There was a little captain with a blue hat and 3 crewmen with striped shirts. The captain shouted, "Let loose the stern line and prepare to sail!" Jack awoke and noticed the fact that his best paper boat was about to set sail across the bedroom. "Hey!" he whispered. "Where are you going with my boat?" "Well, climb aboard, mate!" the paper captain shouted. Jack found himself inside his paper boat as his bedroom filled with the ocean. The paper boat slipped off the bed table and sailed across the room, down the hall, out the front door, and into the street toward the shopping mall. The water rushed the little boat along the gutter, and Jack saw the curb whizzing by. He saw fire hydrants and bus stops and automobile tires as the boat sailed on. Don't you think we might get soggy and sink? Jack asked the paper captain.
Oh, no, my boy. She's made of the toughest stuff for boats, replied the captain.
Where are we sailing to? Jack asked, with some amount of worry.
Pirates, my lad! Pirates are in the parking lot!
Jack was afraid as the paper boat turned a corner, narrowly missing a bottle. Up ahead he could hear a roar. It was the mouth of a very large drain. The little boat was sucked in and nearly turned upside down as it raced through a long, dark pipe. When the boat came out into the light, Jack could see that they had sailed all the way to the giant shopping mall. The parking lot was a vast and rolling sea.
Pirates! Shouted the paper sailors. Pirates ahead!
The scariest paper boat Jack could have imagined sailed toward them. The boat had big yellow sails, and Jack could see paper pirates waving their swords. There was a fierce battle, and Jack fought the pirates like a true hero. When the pirate ship sank with many holes in its side, Jack and the sailors yelled, "Hooray!" The paper boat brought Jack safely back to his bed table, and, after wishing the paper sailors good luck, he climbed back into his bed for a good night's sleep. Jack kept the paper boat on his bed table always, just in case the paper captain and crew should ever need his help again.